Picture this. You are 19 years old, quietly reading in a university library, when your economics professor publicly humiliates you for your book choice. That's exactly what happened to Che Guevara in 1947. His response changed how an entire generation thought about capitalism. Buenos Aires, October 1947. The silence of the university library is broken only by the sound of turning pages. Large windows filter in the autumn sunlight, students studying at tables. At a corner table, somewhat distant from others, sits 19-year-old Ernesto Che Guevara. In his hands is a thick book, Das Kapital, Karl Marx's famous work. Che has a notebook in front of him, carefully taking notes. Sometimes he stops to think, sometimes frowns and reads again. Reading this book isn't easy. It's a heavy work, complex economic theories, philosophical depths. But Che is determined, because he's no longer satisfied with just studying medicine. In recent months, as he thinks about poverty in Latin America, questions multiply in his head. Why is there so much injustice? Why do the rich get richer while the poor get poorer? What's the logic of this system? And he seeks answers from Marx. The capitalist system exploits workers, Marx writes. When Che reads this, he remembers what he saw in Argentina, the condition of factory workers, what farm workers experience. The library door opens. Professor Eduardo Martinez enters. Around 50, elegant suit, expensive shoes. The most famous professor in the economics department. Also one of the biggest defenders of the capitalist system. Professor Martinez tours the library, looking at what students are reading. He likes to do this. He observes which students read correct books, which ones lean toward wrong directions. When he approaches Che's table, he stops. He sees Das Kapital. His eyebrows furrow. He looks at Che, young, serious, concentrated. Typical leftist student appearance. Professor Martinez approaches the table. "Excuse me, young man," he says in a stern voice. "What are you reading?" Che looks up. Of course he knows the professor. Who doesn't know Eduardo Martinez? But the professor doesn't know him. Che is just one of thousands of students. Das Kapital, professor. Martinez's face changes. Ah, Marx. Interesting choice. Other students in the library pay attention. They notice the voices getting a bit louder. Professor Martinez's tone is harsh, almost challenging. "Can you tell me why you're reading this nonsense?" Che is surprised. Nonsense? Of course, Marx's theories are complete fantasy. They have no relation to the real world. At this point, other students in the library completely turn their attention to this conversation. Che remains silent, waiting for the professor to continue. Martinez continues. "Young man, you're a medical student, aren't you? Why are you wasting your time with this communist propaganda? Study science, learn real theories." Che stays calm, but something boils inside him. This professor is belittling him for reading Marx, even humiliating him. "Professor, what do you think Marx got wrong?" Martinez feels confident, because he's the most experienced economics professor at the university, and facing him is just a 19-year-old medical student. Everything. His description of capitalism as an exploitation system is absurd. Capitalism creates prosperity, enriches people, develops society. Nothing Marx said ever came true. Che takes a deep breath, and the words he speaks at that moment will surprise not only Professor Martinez, but everyone in the library. This is exactly when everything changed.
Che stands up. He begins speaking in a calm but determined voice.
"Professor Martinez, I seen your capitalism that creates prosperity. In northern Argentina, farm workers work 12 hours a day and go hungry. In the south, mine workers die with their lungs full of dust. Is this prosperity?
Martinez is surprised. This young man isn't just spouting theories learned from books. He's telling real experiences. Che continues.
According to you, capitalism enriches people. But who gets enriched? Factory owners or those who work in factories? Land owners or those who work the land?
Students in the library listen silently. Che's way of speaking is impressive. Not passive, but active. Not theoretical, but practical. Martinez goes somewhat on the defensive. Of course, the system isn't perfect, but there's no alternative. Communism produces worse results.
Professor, I'm not talking about communism. I'm just saying we can't ignore the problems of the current system.
What problems? Che closes his book, turns fully to the professor.
These problems. The rich get richer while the poor get poorer. Workers receive very little of the value they produce. Capital owners profit without producing anything.
Martinez, irritated. These are Marx's nonsense.
No, Professor. These are realities I've seen with my own eyes.
And right at that moment, Che says something else that will be talked about at the university for weeks.
Professor, if you want to prove Marx is wrong, prove it with facts, not theories. Show me that workers' conditions in Argentina are good. Show me that inequality is decreasing. Show me that the poor are getting richer.
Martinez can't answer. Because Che is right. Inequality in Argentina is real. Poverty is real. Workers' conditions are real. Che continues.
I read Marx because I'm trying to understand the problems of the current system. And to solve these problems, I'm researching alternatives.
So what's the solution, in your opinion? Che will surprise not only Professor Martinez, but himself with the answer he gives at that moment.
I don't know yet, Professor. But what I do know is this. The 9 problems isn't a solution. We need to acknowledge them and work to solve them.
Martinez remains silent. Because this 19-year-old student has cornered him. He presented practical realities, not theoretical debate. Other students in the library listen mesmerized. Because for the first time, they're seeing someone challenge a professor so logically. Martinez makes his final move. Young man, you're an idealist. Things don't work this way in the real world. Che smiles.
Professor, maybe I am an idealist, but you are also someone who defends the current situation. We both have prejudices. The difference is, I question my prejudices, you defend yours.
This sentence completely silences the professor. Because Che is right. Martinez doesn't question the current system, he blindly defends it.
Martinez gathers his books. We'll continue this discussion later, he says, and leaves the library. But it's too late now. The seed has been planted. Che's conversation that day reached the ears of 20 to 30 students in the library, and they told others about this conversation. Within a week, the entire university heard about this incident. Medical student Che Guevara gave Professor Martinez a lesson on Marx. Young Che silenced the economics professor. For the first time, someone told Martinez the truth. This incident changed Che's position at the university. He was no longer just a medical student. He was known as someone who thinks, questions, and is brave. More importantly, other students also began questioning. They started reading Marx. They looked for books criticizing capitalism. They became curious about political theories. Professor Martinez, meanwhile, began avoiding Che because this young man had disrupted his comfort zone. A month later, when Che was again reading Marx in the library, other students came up to him. Che, would you explain Marx to us too? Could you explain this capitalism issue in more detail? What did you learn about these topics? Che realized he had become not just a learner, but a teacher. From that day on, a small group formed around Che. They discussed political theories. They talked about problems in Latin America. They shared their search for solutions. The Marx book that Professor Martinez called Nonsense had become one of the most read books at the university. In the summer of 1948, when Che was advancing to the third year of medical school, he ran into Professor Martinez one day. The professor approached him. Che, what you said that day in the library, it made me think. Che was surprised. How did it make you think, Professor? Maybe I should have listened to your criticisms about the current system. Maybe you were right. Che smiled. Professor, I wasn't right. I was just asking questions, and I wasn't afraid to ask questions. Martinez nodded. That's an important difference. Ignoring questions is easier than solving them. That day they had a long conversation. Martinez acknowledged Che's observational power. Che learned from Martinez's experience. After this conversation, Martinez began teaching different topics in his classes. He explained not only capitalism's advantages, but also its disadvantages. He taught students to think critically. In 1950, when Che was in fifth year of medical school, a conference was given at the university, Social Injustice in Latin America. The speaker was Che Guevara. That day, there were 200 people in the amphitheater, students, professors, even Professor Martinez. Che said this at that conference. 3 years ago at this university, a professor told me Marx was nonsense. Today, I understand that professor wasn't completely wrong. Not everything Marx said is true, but he wasn't completely right either, because the questions Marx asked were the right questions. After the conference, Professor Martinez approached Che. Che, I apologize for being harsh with you that day in the library. Che replied, Don't apologize, Professor. That day you taught me a lot. What did I teach? To question authority, that no one, no theory, no system is exempt from criticism. Professor Martinez smiled. I didn't know I taught you so much. You did, Professor, but not intentionally. 12 years after that library incident, in 1959, when the Cuban Revolution succeeded, Professor Martinez saw Che's photo in the newspaper. He had become Cuba's new industry minister. Martinez wrote in his diary that day, Today I learned that the young man I encountered in the library in 1947 was Che Guevara. That day I was angry at him for reading Marx. Now I understand that he not only read Marx, but put what he learned into practice. Maybe that day it wasn't me, but he who gave me a lesson. So I ask you, what's your Das Kapital? What subjects are you researching that draw reactions from your environment? Maybe not politics, maybe technology, maybe art, maybe science, but you surely have an area where others say, why are you reading this? Why are you dealing with this? Che Guevara that day in the library didn't just defend Marx, he defended the right to curiosity, the freedom to learn, the courage to question. And this defense was the first step of the journey that made him a legend. What nonsense are you reading? And do you have the courage to keep reading it?